Well, welcome everyone to this final day of PHILAB Ontario's regional conference. Today we have two panels and closing remark by Dr. Peter Elson, PHILAB's co-director. I'd like to open this final day with a panel on identification of sector priorities for future research and development. The panel is slightly different format than the other ones we had so far, whereby panelists will have 10 minutes each to present. Then we'll just open the floor to encourage further interaction with the speakers. So housekeeping items. Everyone, including the presenters, need to have their video and audio off if not presenting to avoid distraction. Presenters can share their slides as well. Presenters will turn on video during the Q&A period. The audience member can turn on video when providing a comment or asking a question. We actually encourage that. At the end of the presentation, perhaps we can all turn our camera on and have kind of a more of an informal context happening so we can all further exchange. Participant can enter their question in the chat, of course, raise your hand as well with your reactions options. And if you want to, for clarity, each question written in the chat should start, we encourage you to start it with a Q so we can identify those with just more general comments. So for today, we have three presenters, well-known as well in the field of philanthropy. Dr. Susan Phillips is a professor, School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University in Ottawa, and the founder and director of its Masters of Philanthropy in Nonprofit Leadership, the only one in Canada. So she's also editor-in-chief of Nonprofit and Volunteer Sectors Quarterly. Suzanne research focus on place-based philanthropy and public policy for non-profits. She's co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Philanthropy and is currently leading a study team exploring the question, what makes some charities and nonprofits more resilient than others? So very much aligned to the topic today. Jean-Marc Mangin, which will be our second presenters today, is the president of Philanthropic Foundations Canada, a national network of family, independent and corporate grant makers in Canada, which includes many of the largest private charitable foundations in the country. Prior to PFC, Jean-Marc Mangin led the renewal process of the Federation of the Humanities and Social Sciences, the largest national organization of Canadian researchers and scholars, as its executive director from 2010 to 2016. Jean-Marc, I hope I did a good job there. And finally, we'll have David Lasby. He is the Director, Research and Evaluation at Imagine Canada for the past 10 years and has been at Imagine Canada for 20 years. So also great accomplishments here. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter to share her slides, Dr. Susan Phillips.
Thank you. We've been asked to talk about possible research priorities. And I'm going to take a somewhat different view on this, perhaps, because I'm not going to get into specifics. In terms of setting a research agenda for the sector, what would that look like and how should we do that? My own view is, having spent many decades in many different settings talking about a research agenda for the sector, that it never comes to fruition. Funding falls apart, people go on to other things. So the ability to drive a collective agenda with specific topics often is a bit diversionary, or at least it doesn't hold our attention for long enough. So I want to suggest, nevertheless, that data really matter. If you look at the unfunded report that students from our center was involved in with the Foundation for Black Communities, they came to us asking, simply that we don't really know, nobody's looked at how much funding from private and community foundations goes to Black-led, Black-serving organizations. And I had an alum and a PhD student who also teaches our community philanthropy course, set about to go through the T3010 data. We didn't have much time. It was a matter of weeks. So as important as the work was, it showed how even a little bit of data that exposed, that lifted back the curtain on what we thought was the case, but didn't know because nobody bothered to document it, how significant and important even those basic data could be. And imagine what we could do if we had a better data infrastructure. If we had connected data sets, collaborative arrangements where we could have access that question of funding very quickly without having to comb through the T3010. So rather than talk about specific topics, I want to talk about process and take a long view and the importance of getting the sector on agendas so that we can advance agendas. What do I mean by that? In terms of process, I think the most important thing is to have the mechanisms, the connections that helps scholars ask the right questions. The right questions being those that are significant and important to the sector, that the sector understands too what research are interested in looking in, because so much of research is curiosity driven. But scholars, whether they're graduate students or faculty or independent researchers, really want to, certainly in this field, do research that matters, that has impact. And sometimes the most important thing is appreciating what are the relevant, the quote, right questions to make the research relevant. That said, I think we are at a point of such systems change that there are transformational big questions coming out of the pandemic and of the racial justice movement. And that will take collective action. It will take the big questions. It will take groups of researchers, and it will take bodies to drive that agenda. And again, data infrastructure and using data in meaningful ways, as opposed to kind of pulling together bits here and there, is really important to that process. But as an educator, I also take a long view, and we need to grow the research field. It's underdeveloped in Canada certainly compared to the US or the UK. And therefore, we need to be producing across many disciplines and across many institutions, graduate students, doctoral students, postdoctoral students, and we need to find then places for those to be placed. If we're producing PhDs, as we should be, who are going to carry that research forward, they need to have positions in the sector, in academia, in governments. And I don't think those are as developed as they should be or need to be to really take research seriously in this country. I also see, and a lot of this comes from my work as editor-in-chief of NVSQ, where I see research from many countries. I don't think we have developed the multiplicity of research methodologies because we don't train our students well enough in a wide range of methodologies. And I would say that across both the nonprofit and public management fields in Canada, that we tend to be much more qualitative. And I value qualitative research. I do qualitative research, but I think we need to develop a stronger, bigger toolbox. And we need to enhance the value of research to the sector. I see often many big institutions in this sector not appreciating the value of what research can do, or you talk about data and eyes often glaze over. And for that research to have value and to be carried forward, the sector needs to be more on the agenda of governments, of the public, and that's part of the overall visibility of what's needed in the sector. Nevertheless, I would fail the marshmallow test, even though I said I don't think we can drive research agendas about specific questions. I think I would make the case that we are at a time when there are such big transformations taking place that I have at least a short list and probably a very long list underlying this of what some of those transformative questions might be. First of all, we need to document and analyze what's happening. We're through a period of enormous change. That's demographic change, that's changes around post-COVID, the justice movements, etc. So we need to know how the sector is doing, how philanthropy is doing, some basic capturing of that. I think there's a research agenda around the credibility of philanthropy. If we look to the US and the criticisms that have wafted north from that, we need to document, analyze, and understand what's distinctive about Canadian philanthropy. And there are new models of philanthropy emerging. Foundation for Black Communities is a very good example that embraced explicitly a community empowerment, a shift the power approach to how they'll work. I think we'll start seeing that taking hold across the sector. We need to understand better what enhances resiliency, what promotes innovation, and how to build that into greater innovation. There's a big agenda, naturally, because I do public policy, I would include this, around policy and regulation, and both provincially and federally. And I take policy very widely here, not only the regulation of charities, but funding regimes that have regulatory component, a whole variety of issues there. And funding models, something that ONN has been pushing for many years in terms of funding reform. As foundations look at less restrictive funding, at how we'll see hollowing out of many communities as a result of the pandemic and the hollowing out of services, the need to find new and more effective funding models, all of those should be part of our agenda. So while I said I wouldn't name topics, I did, and I look forward to a discussion on those.
Thank you, Susan, for laying out quite a lot, actually, for the Q&A period. I would like now to invite Jean-Marc Mangin from PFC to share his slide.
Merci, Manuel. Merci, Susan. Unfortunately, I don't have a squirrel on my slide, so hopefully I'll put it to sleep. And let's see if it actually works. So, thanks first of all for the invitation. So I'd like just to share a few thoughts. You can actually see some overlap with some of the points that Susan just raised, minus a squirrel. So my first slide is wrong. So if yes, you can actually be at a crossroad and also in uncharted territories. There are choices to be made, and sometimes cliches can be true, and that we are living in historic times is undoubtedly true. This massive political, economic, social shift that are happening and accelerating because of the pandemic. And if you take some historical comparison, coming out of World War II and World War I, the international community put system in place that in the case of World War I failed very quickly. In the case of World War II, brought to the Western world prosperity for 70 years. But that system is showing all of its cracks, and it's coming to a transformational moment. And so that's kind of the big picture. So what is the space for philanthropy within that, and what how are we going to incorporate these transformational pressure? And I think there's an opportunity for our sector to develop and emerge a new social compact with Canadians, but because there's so many unknowns moving forward, there's a critical role for research and for data to shed some light, and for that research that needs to be relevant both to practice and to policy. So what choices that that foundations in particular have to make moving forward? And there's a list of questions that I'm putting on the screen here. That list is not exhaustive. There's many more other questions that could be attached to that. For example, the relationship with government. Should foundation try to align their program as much as possible with the government initiative, or try to influence government? Or should they try to actually play on this autonomy and freedom to initiate and support initiative that would never come from government? Is that can you have both? Can you actually all play on these two dimensions? And what does good practice look like in kind of government relations? So that's a question that's not listed here. So what we've seen over the last year, that many foundations have provided for the first time unrestricted program funding to their partners, but it's not clear to me, and that's why research could shed some light, whether these practices are temporary or permanent. Is this actually, as we believe, bringing to better programming and better impact? So there's some evidence from elsewhere in the world, but actually quite little from Canada to know what are the benefits, but also the pitfalls of moving together these with looser agreement and project proposal and reporting. What are the implications of that? And some people are putting trust-based philanthropy in the position with strategic philanthropy. In fact, can you still be strategic in your choices as a funder, but also develop different kind of relations with your partners that are much more based in trust? Are they in conflict, or can both be true? Again, research can shed some light. I find the issue around fascinating that with the pandemic, we've seen many initiatives of foundation working with the community foundation on very localized response to the crisis. We've seen that in Vancouver, we've seen that in Calgary, we've seen that in Montreal, and so that more localized approach is again a permanent feature of the ecosystem moving forward, or is it a blip in our response? Other foundations have decided to work on broader policy issues. Climate change comes to mind, of course, but also if you look at the last budget and the announcement around childcare, but there's some foundations that have been working on that issue since the 1980s, and what it was at the margin of the policy process, and not alone, working through partners, working with researchers, working with activists, creating the space and building the evidence for influencing government policy, first in Quebec and now across the country. So that long-term engagement on broad societal issues, that there's some interesting case studies that, again, that there's little research in Canada to try to capture what has worked and what does not work so well about influencing government policy, which I raised. The last year brought with the global anti-racism movement starting from in the US, but all over the world, that put the issue of representation and anti-racism right at the core of our operation. We know that philanthropy in Canada is a wide project. So how do you open up and make sure that it's not only an issue of saying the right things, but doing the right things through a range of ways in your governance, in your staffing, in your programming. You could realize with some family foundation, like how do you diversify a family? So, but we know they are interesting practice through advisory committees, through external members, to help broaden the perspective around the board table, around the staffing, around the programming. So again, what's working, what's not working, a lot of project, a lot of research, interesting research project to be done. On the issue of reconciliation, well, we've had many foundations, over 80 signing the Declaration of Action in 2015. And some interesting work has come forward, but my perception progress has been quite slow. Why is it so slow? So that's like and what could be done to accelerate progress? I'm quite excited about the work that's been done with the Indigenous People Resilience Fund, and that use the pandemic as an accelerator to bring it up to speed and to deploy philanthropic resources in very innovative ways. I mean, if for some of you that perhaps have seen our Wednesday webinar on December 2nd with our colleagues from the Indigenous People Resilience Funds, they don't use paper proposals. They use the oral tradition of Indigenous nations to share what the needs are and to start projects. It's a very different way of approaching philanthropy. There's a lot to be learned as well. On the issue of investments, they are massive interest of how do you unlock the assets in the endowments to better serve our mission, more closely related to programming, impact investment. How do you define these things? What are the actual rates of returns? What's the actually and and go beyond the rates of returns? What's the social impact of these investments on the community? Again, the Canadian landscape is fairly undeveloped, and we're still lacking real case studies. It's sufficient case studies, and I want to point out that actually there's been some good progress over the last year with the partnership we've had with Susan, the partnership we've had with PhiLab, and the emergence of case studies of the Canadian context. We tend to go to the US or to Europe for finding case studies, and there's some learning to be done there as well. But what strikes me is because it was so different in Canada vis-a-vis the US, that we should be very careful in terms of just adopting either the critique or the strategies of foundations that's currently in the US and just apply it without question in Canada. We should look at the Canadian context and realities and learn from those and make that learning widely available to help us as a community in terms of these kind of choices that we have to make moving forward. And I think I'm going over my 10 minutes, but just a couple of last points. One is that I think going back to pre-COVID is not an option. Yes, there's a power of established patterns, going back to what's comfortable. But the first point that I made, that simply putting new words to old patterns won't wash. with our partners. And we have to look at the intent of the action and the impact of the action. And try to do as much as we can to narrow the gap between intent and impact. So that for me, that's kind of the exciting in terms of building a research agenda with our partners in the community, to build on the strengths of philanthropy, but also address many of the weaknesses. So that like what I mean by playing to philanthropy's strengths is that philanthropy has got an amazing freedom, a tolerance to risk, an ability to fund things that no other dollar can fund. It's long-term horizon, it's lack of agenda and obligation to politics. But with that freedom also comes responsibility, because we are fiduciaries of private resources serving the public good. And we need to be being accountable, transparent, sharing our knowledge, lessons, and resources as partners, not as directing and controlling funders. So that shift, we need a new regulatory framework to help with that shift. Again, research can play a critical role in that journey.
We have 1 more minute, Jean-Marc.
Yes, okay. And then so to do that, PFC, the board, went through a process of looking at our mission and our strategic plan moving forward, and we revisited what our mission is. That we are clearly here to serve the public good and embracing the diversity of philanthropy in the pursuit of a just, equitable, and sustainable world. And I'll just leave you with the last slide, that an invitation to seize the moment. I'm a member of the technical committee of PhiLab, that's that shirt finance program, where to finance partnership research between foundation, civil society organization, and researchers to really address some of the questions that I've raised today, and Susan as well, and I'm sure David will point out the gap in the data. There's a lot to be done. I'm a bit surprised that we don't have that many proposals coming to us that are of a real partnership nature between not-for-profit charitable organization and researchers, and to really be ambitious in the kind of research questions, and that help in that transformation, that address the transformation moment that we're in. So on that note, Manuel, I apologize for being so over my time, and I'll pass on back to you.
You've addressed so many important issues that I felt compelled to let you finish your thoughts. Thank you so much, Jean-Marc. I would like now to invite our next presenter, and on the left, David Lasby from Imagine Canada, to share his slide.
All right, I think is everybody seeing it now?
We are.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'd like to take 10 minutes or so and just give my perspective of research and development needs from the perspective of community organizations. It's a lot of ground to cover in 10 minutes, so it's a little bit of a daunting task, but I'll kind of do my best. The first thing that I thought I would start out with is giving people a little bit of a sense of what the lived reality is from the perspective of an organization attempting to use research. Now, this is from some research I did a couple of years ago, where I asked charity leaders to rank these 10 functional areas in terms of what gets the most attention. Okay, so when you see something where it's high in the red, it tends to rank very highly. When you see something with lots in the gray, it tends to rank towards the bottom of the pile. So we see things like fundraising and revenue generation. It gets an average ranking of 3.4 and basically comes out near the top of the heap. Okay. The thing that's particularly interesting from a research perspective really is how comparatively low ranking a couple of key functional areas are. That's the evaluation and measurement, information technology, and of course research. These are ranking, down towards the very bottom of the pile. Very much what's at the highest priority are the mechanics of keeping the organization afloat. Ensuring that you've got the resources that you need, that you're talking to the people that you need to, that you're discharging your fiduciary duties, all that sort of stuff. Now, since the transition to the pandemic, one of the things that we then wanted to do was, okay, for some reason the slide is not advancing. There we go. We sort of checked back in with people in November, asking them about the extent to which their attention and focus in these different areas was changing. Okay, and overwhelmingly what we found was lots more effort being devoted to many areas. The real key thing here, information technology, really went from being an area where there wasn't very much focus to the top new priority. Many areas still kind of staying about the same here. We did add one or two areas. We added program development because there were a lot of new programs. That's clearly taking a high degree of interest. We also asked about advocacy and public policy in this one, and actually a fairly heightened degree of focus there. What really sort of stood out for us, there were a couple of things. Fundraising and revenue generation, comparatively more balanced approach, in the sense that there were a fair number of organizations decreasing emphasis on that. We think that's really due to the fact that for many organizations, they were operating in a non-permissive fundraising environment, very challenging for them, and really what they did was focus their attention in other areas. Other areas that are taking a bit of a beating: staff development, and then again, still this research and evaluation and measurement. The big takeaway here for this time period is that we consistently saw a very broad-based expansion of effort in many, many different areas. On average, they're increasing their focus in 3.5 different areas and only decreasing it in 1.8. Okay. What we also saw as well, we asked organizational leaders whether they were focusing more on the immediate challenges of survival for the organization, or actually focusing on building the organizational capacity for the long term. And what we got was a really interesting pattern of results here. On average, those organizations that are dealing with immediate challenges are increasing their focus in far more areas, an average of 4.2, than they are decreasing it. So they're being spread even thinner than they were previously. And it's actually only the small number of organizations. There's only about 8% of organizations told us they were actually prioritizing organizational capacity. Those are the only guys that are actually sort of narrowing their focus, trying to take stuff off of their plate and really get down to sort of improving practice. What you are really building capacity over the long term, I guess, would be the better way of putting it. What you really get to when you look at things from the perspective of a community organization, in terms of how the information pile is sort of divided, you end up with this sort of what you could call a hierarchy of needs or hierarchy of information. And it's not to say that there's a differential importance of research outputs here, but they sort of are arrayed in terms of what they do. So there's a large mass of information that sort of really falls into this bottom category of, that I call resources, infrastructure, process. It's all about how do you acquire the resources you need for the organization, how does it function, governance, all the sort of nuts and bolts of running an organization. Okay. Then on top of this, there's another sort of set of things that's really about the environment, the trends that we're seeing, stuff like that. And a lot of this stuff is actually about optimizing the organizational function, being prepared for the future, helping to plan ahead, better, more specific knowledge of the client base, things like that. And then when you get up to the very sort of top of it, you've got things that are very focused on the intervention that really the infrastructure of the organization supports. Okay, so adult literacy, the mechanics of it, mentoring children, what works, what doesn't work, things like that. And the thing that's interesting about all of this stuff from a research perspective is that the stuff down at the bottom has a great deal of commonality in the sense that what is relevant to one organization has a relatively high probability of being relevant to other organizations. There's sort of a cohesive body there. And what you find as you go further up the chain towards the interventions and impact, there's a greater specificity and sort of a breaking down into specific interest areas where one group of organizations is very interested in one topic but not in others. And this is sort of the challenge in producing information for community organizations. Okay, the other thing that's actually quite interesting about it, I think, is in many ways when you look at it from a perspective of the return on investment from an individual piece of research that a user picks up and sort of begins to apply, I think you probably have a higher return on investment from some of these pieces of research that focus on interventions and impact, just in terms of the sense of a new piece of information has potentially a big change in what you're doing and how you're operating and the benefit that is being accrued to Canadians. Okay, so that's sort of the environment here of what it looks like. Now, in terms of specific research priorities, my experience is very much like Susan. I mean, I've probably sat on on meetings like this probably 5 or 6 times over the last 20 years. It's been a fair number of times. Every time we surface really good research ideas. Every time there's really a wide range of things that you look at and say, yeah, if we can develop better understanding of that, we're really going to move things forward. It's going to be great. But I keep coming back to this challenge in the sense that our list of research needs, it's always growing. Okay, we always are finding new areas that are critically important, right? We're seeing stuff now with diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism, very important. All sorts of new funding practices, that we've heard mentioned. And the thing that's interesting about it, never do I really see things come off the list. And interestingly, never do I see things diminish in terms of their absolute importance. We add new things that have relatively high importance, but every research topic kind of seems as important as it's always been. Okay. And the challenge that I keep seeing in having gone through a number of these exercises, looking at it from the perspective of community organization, are the questions that we very frequently don't ask of ourselves during these exercises, okay? What the research establishment, at least as we're producing stuff for community organizations, keeps feeling like to me is kind of like this. There's a lot of horsepower there. There's a huge amount of activity. You know, it's just, you know, it's fast, it's loud, it's exciting, it's really great. But the transmission of energy to the ground, you know, at the level of the community organization is maybe not as efficient as we would like it to be. Okay, and I think there's kind of three major thematic areas that, if we really want to be delivering power to the ground effectively, we need to be thinking about these exactly at the same time as we're thinking about our research priorities. In the past, what I've seen is we think about research priorities in isolation, and then a lot of these other things, we know they're related, but they also get considered kind of in isolation from the research priorities. And I think if we really want to change things so we're delivering power, we need to be thinking about them all at about the same time. Okay, I think the first key area is how users and community organizations access and use information. Okay, their information use is not this. This is not what it looks like. You know, they're not going to traditional libraries and doing this. It's not this either. It's not academic literature searching through stuff at a university library. Overwhelmingly, it's this. Okay, Google is your friend if you're working in many community organizations, particularly the smaller ones. You're basically searching for information on the wider web. If you're okay, thanks. If you're well integrated and you've phoned me, well, this is what you get. You'll get a better Google search. I'm exaggerating for humor a little bit, but not as much as I would like. Okay. Really, the thing to be keeping in mind is gray literature is the king here. Okay, that is what community organizations run on for this sort of thing. And I think we also need to be thinking that a couple of things here. One is we have three key entry points into the user cycle. One is when we're applying for grants. The other is when we're reporting on the impact of our grants and what we've done, and then really the strategic planning cycle. Those are the easiest points to get research findings into the hands of users in a way that it's actually going to change practice. Okay. The other key thing to be thinking about here is that community users are frequently they're really drowning in data. Okay, what we actually need are more tools and assets for integrating the data stores that we have and making sense of them and getting them connected to other research findings that are being made so we can make sense of it. Okay. Second area to be thinking about specifically here are the structural characteristics of organized philanthropy and the role of research in taking advantage of its positive aspects of that structure and helping mitigate the negative. One thing that we see here is that foundations are comparatively well placed to make effective use of research and to help disseminate that to their stakeholders in ways that they can take advantage of it and make use of it. We saw a lot of that yesterday in some of the great research that the United Way of Greater Toronto does. I mean, one of the nice things about foundations, for as long as I have surveyed them, they've always consistently been under less organizational stress and have had relatively greater resources for this sort of thing, and they sit at the center of networks.
Can you
the other thing? Okay, yeah. The other key role for research and researchers is basically to be interlocutors. One of the real key things about the nature of the relationship is that we're frequently trying to explain community organizations and foundations are frequently trying to have conversations that are far more complicated than the communications channel can handle. And you sort of end up in this situation like this, where you're continually having conversations trying to fit your findings and what each of you learn into formats so the other can use it. I think a lot of our research should be thinking very specifically about this role. Okay, and then the last and least sort of thought through one that I've seen, and we've bumped up against it a lot in the course of this conference, is the need for basically organizing principles and sense making. We've got a lot of different areas of knowledge that are poorly integrated. And when you're looking at it from the perspective of a community organization, it's a self-serve type of process. Okay, they really need to have some guideposts and maps here to help make better use of it. There, and I think that's done. Sorry, that one took
thank you. I appreciate
longer than.
Thank you very much. So I would technically now give the word of closing remarks to Dr. Elson, who's been the co-director of PhiLab with Jean-Marc Mangin. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Elson has been at the School of Public Administration at University of Victoria, the Institute of Community Prosperity at Mount Royal University. And he's also been the English language editor of Answer, J, the Journal Association for Nonprofit and Social Economic Research from 2010 to 2015. He's also active in numerous provincial and national committee. One of his latest books is Funding Policies and the Nonprofit Sectors in Western Canada, published by the University of Toronto Press. And you might want to correct me on this one, Peter, but you've also been part of the Special Senate Committee on the Charitable Sector, right? If I'm correct?
No, I'm a member. I'm a member of the Advisory Committee on the Charitable Sector to the Minister of Revenue.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. My apologies. And the floor is yours.
Hey, don't worry about it. No, it's all good.
The floor is yours, Peter.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'd first like to say that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, specifically the Songhees Nation here in Victoria, British Columbia. I was raised in Algonquin territory. I've also spent time in Treaty 7 territory, but I've made my home here in Lekwungen territory for the last 6 years. I'd like to also thank Manuel for the opening acknowledgement that he provided at the beginning of the conference. It was very inclusive, and I think his invitation for all of us to think about the traditional territory that we're on still stands. We should still be thinking about it even now, and continue to do so in a good way. I think the whole issue of place-based philanthropy as a phenomenon, it speaks in some very small way to the importance of place. And one of the reasons why we see so many different indigenous languages, I think there are 34 different indigenous languages in British Columbia, is because of that sense of place, that the language, when you talk to indigenous people about their language, they say, we're the voice of the land, big L in the sense of land and water. And their language, their vocabulary, their nuances in their language come as a specific reflection to where the particular place in which they live and work. There's a West Coast, I think it's Neutralith, people in western side of Vancouver Island that in fact talk about, have a name for settlers, and the translation of their name is driftwood. We go from place to place without really landing, really being and acknowledging and honoring the place where we are. If we did acknowledge and honor the place where we live, then we wouldn't see the systematic and ongoing destruction of the environment that in fact we perpetuate on an ongoing basis. That's a reflection of not being in the place where you live. And so thank you, Manuel, for that opening. I appreciated that very much. I wasn't able to attend all the sessions because I had other commitments, and there's a 3-hour time difference. And so, but I also want to give thanks to Isadora and Grace. Thank you too for your notes that you provided. Really appreciated that. Catherine for all of her work. Andrea, I know that I've attended and managed and overseen many conferences in my day, and I know all the hard work that people behind the scenes do. And I want to, as they would say here, I want to say Heshka, put my hands up and say thank you for all of your hard work. But there are some themes, and I'd like to just go for a second back to Andrew's opening remarks, because I think that he said a couple of things that really struck me. One of which was, and it was referred to by, I think, Jean-Marc earlier this morning, about the whole issue of capital. And it's really putting, it's basically that old joke about the commitment. Who has, if you're having bacon and eggs, there's a commitment by the chicken in terms of laying the eggs, but the pig makes a very different kind of commitment when it comes to the bacon that goes with the eggs, and the separation of that. Really, that slice of bacon is what we're asking. We're asking people to really look seriously at their privilege and the longstanding access or inability to access by capital, by groups that have been systematically and over a long term, being basically erased from our conversation. And although, for example, a good example is the initiative taken by the Black community groups with the report Unfunded that came out last December. So this is December 2020, and it was a Black-led organization and group of organizations that spearheaded that. So what struck me was that wasn't a question we were asking. As a white person, as a white settler, as a white dominated kind of, let's say, institutions and so forth, why aren't we asking those questions? Why are we responding to those marginalized questions only when, in fact, we're prodded or poked and so forth? And I think that speaks to my own journey that I've been through. I won't go into detail in terms of my own decolonization journey, but one of the themes too is that aspect of self-reflection. Where are we? Every single one of us is an author of some dimension of inequality and racism within our own lives, the decisions that we make, what we do, whether we speak up or not, whether we ask some really tough questions about who's at a decision-making table and who isn't, who we hire and why, what kind of research we're engaged in and so forth, who do we involve with, and that brings me to, I guess, another kind of theme, and that was one about, is there a shift that's actually really taking place now? And some people said, yes, there's a shift. Maybe there's a shift. We'll find out if there's a shift. What I would propose is that there are in this moment, probably two competing narratives. One being the body of narrative around, we want to create a new normal. We want to make significant changes to address inequalities and marginalization and so forth within our society. The other narrative is, I can't wait to get back to normal. I can't wait to take that trip. I can't wait to fly. I can't wait to do this. And those two narratives, I think, are something that we need to pay some real attention to, because they play out in, I would say, three dimensions: a political dimension, a structural dimension, and a functional direction. In where we work, where we play, our foundations, our research, and so forth. And you'll see it in the media, those kind of those things we see. And I think that we can define it, but I think there's a real there's a comfort, because there's a degree of comfort that in that nostalgic view of, I want to get back to normal. I want to get back to the way things were. And this is a very normal part of a crisis and crisis sort of adaptation and management. So I'm just saying that that's a way I think we need to look at that, what we see in front of us on an ongoing basis in a very real way. The other sort of theme that I want to touch on is what I would call 360-degree funding, or surround funding. And I think we need to think about that we think about, you're not only, how many foundations are doing 360-degree funding? That is, they're funding even if they're funding a project, are they funding the project? Are they funding the organization? Are they funding the community? Are they funding the society? Are they providing, in fact, that surround support that in fact provides the opportunity for very real, meaningful work to take place? I'm really glad to have seen that the whole issue of project funding and its time-limited dimension has really been driven to the fore during the last 3 days. And I think that is very much a part of, as Jean-Marc said, that starvation cycle that comes in. So I'll give you an example. Again, I'll go back to when I was executive director of the Ontario Public Health Association. And that was that we received a relatively small sustaining grant from the Minister of Grant. I think $25,000 a year we initially got from the Ministry of Health. If I went out and got project funding, I would have to get somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 in project funding to, in fact, recoup that $25,000 over which I had total discretion. So you tell me, where the cost benefit is in terms of, providing even a relatively small amount of, core sustainable funding. The opportunity cost for any organization to get that equivalent is absolutely phenomenal. And the cost associated with chasing that kind of projects on an ongoing basis really keeps people very much as David's racing car thing, basically spinning in the right place, using all the energy but not getting anywhere. And I think people need to be called out on that and in terms of funders. And it's one of those things where it's if not us, who? If not when, why not now, kind of thing. Because it doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve us as researchers. It doesn't serve foundations. It doesn't serve communities, and it doesn't serve society. The last thing I'd like to touch on briefly, or I guess maybe the second last thing, is um, maybe a bit more philosophical. That is, are we actually asking the right questions? And again, coming back to Andrew's opening remarks about coming to the point of who's really benefiting here. If we, if we're not addressing anything in terms of power inequities, if we're not prepared to really examine who we are, and then that's, you know, where does that take us in terms of asking the right questions? The second part of that is, are the right people asking the right questions? Are we as researchers, as university, are we the people that actually need, are we the ones that should be even asking the questions? Maybe not. Maybe in fact, it's the communities that need to be asking the questions, not us. And for those of you, I mean, my PhD is in community development, so you know where I'm going with that. In terms of the importance of bringing community in at the center of that and genuinely listening. And that brings us back to the whole importance of relationship. And we, in the last discussion and everything else, and if you're talking to, Indigenous scholars, Indigenous communities, well, first of all, they'll say, and scholars have written about this, is, research is one of the dirtiest words in Indigenous communities, because they've been researched at and to, but never with, or very infrequently with. And all of that is the basis of relationship building. And I would say that unless we're committed, and unless foundations are committed to genuinely building a very different kind of relationship with the communities that they'd like to see a difference made in, then we have to really ask ourselves whether that's money worth receiving or not. And so who's asking the questions, and are we asking the right ones? I'm going to finish with just a comment about the power of stories. And I think that we have heard a lot of stories over the last 3 days, and thanks to Catherine, over the next couple of weeks or so, the stories, the presentations that we've heard over the last 3 days will be posted on the Ontario Hub website for people to revisit those stories. And I'd really like you to think about either a person or a moment that really struck you, that you'd like to go back, whether that's one of David's slides or whatever the case may be, or a comment, because we find ourselves in very different places at different times. And the opportunity to go back and hear a story again is really important, to see it in a different kind of context. And as we go through our own self-reflection, because as the work, for example, that the Circle on Philanthropy and Aboriginal people do with foundations and others, all of their work starts with self-reflection. And we think, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about, the changes that we're seeing in society, the changes that we'd like to see out there. Fundamentally, the first step towards seeing those changes is to see yourself and to see your own context and how you walk on the land and through society, and what contribution and what you carry with you as you go forward. So I'd like you to think about that, and I'll end with those remarks. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring these closing remarks.